Nice to see that as we approach another weekend, we get another round of balance tuning in the PTR for patch 11.2. This time, I would consider overall the set of tuning positive, although we do have some questionable or disappointing things, like the thing we start with, which is the change, another change, to Breath of Sindragosa. Because Blizzard started in the first round of tuning doing something quite interesting and unique, which was giving, for the first time, another non-evoker spec, or a non-evoker class, an empower spell. They gave Frost DK the ability to choose their cooldown. With Breath of Sindragosa, they gave the Breath 3 different empower levels with longer durations, more damage, but also longer cooldown, to allow you to basically choose the cooldown you wanted. Apparently, Blizzard got the feedback that this wasn't cool. Many felt that the casting requirement made it difficult to use and broke the flow of Frost DK's rotation, so now Breath of Sindragosa is back to being a fixed cooldown. 90-second cooldown, 60 runic power, default starting duration of 8 seconds, and gets extended by 1 second per every consume of Killing Machine or Rhyme. So, disappointing. It would have been cool to have this first, empower kind of spell to a non-evoker class, but that's the change given to Frost DK on their main major cooldown. We then have a more drastic change to Unholy DK. Let's just skip the other things for now and focus on the important one. Bursting Swords now damage up to 7 nearby targets. Yes, the Bursting Swords. What you blow up when you burst a Festering Wound. This was the bread and butter of the turbo uncapped AoE up to 20 targets of an Unholy DK. It's the reason why right now Unholy DK has been giga meta in Mythic Plus, because you're allowed to do certain kinds of mega AoE pools, and Unholy is excellent at those pools together with Balanced Druid. And this is now going away, because now Bursting Swords is target capped. Now, there are some containment protocols put up by Blizzard to strengthen your AoE on lower targets, of course, but the gist of the whole thing is that now you no longer are a mass AoE, turbo AoE, mega pool powerhouse in the next patch. So the buff itself is quite relevant, as you can see here. This is your current live scaling with your Bursting Source. You get to up to 8 targets, and then you keep growing up to 20 targets to up to 3000% attack power scaling on 20 targets. Yeah, and then now this is what it's gonna look like in 11.2. You go up to 8, and then you stop at 8. At about 2400% attack power. So you are losing basically roughly 500% attack power scaling per button press, per Bursting Source being blown up with this change. So on higher targets, it's a loss. Now, you do have some benefits here and there, like the fact that Bursting Swords now by default are gonna be doing more damage, or the fact that bursting a Festering Wound now keeps refreshing your Festering Scythe override aura, as also more scaling with your stats, because now Scourge Strike crits will give your Festering Wound 20% increased damage with crits. And this is also going to be affecting your Bursting Source damage, so more value with your crit scaling damage. Same goes for more scaling with stats. You have Grave Mastery, which is your newly added talent to scale with pets, and Plague Mastery to scale with your diseases. Now this is also going to be affecting your Gargoyle and Legion of Souls for your minions, and your Festering Wound for your basically your non-minion build. The other positive change initially is the massive buff given to Death and Decay and Desecrate. Desecrate is your new talent to be the opposite of Defile. In the PTR already, Death and Decay is being buffed in damage by 100%. It's getting its damage doubled. And after its damage is doubled, you can take Desecrate to further increase the damage of Death and Decay by 100%. and go back to having a 20-second cooldown. On top of this, the active ability of Desecrate consume your Death and Decay to crush your enemies, dealing 100% of its remaining damage instantly, on top of applying a bunch of Festering Wounds to all of the targets inside. Now this is very relevant now because with these significant buffs given to Death and Decay, doubling the base damage plus further doubling the damage with Desecrate, now the double pop of this button, so you click Death and Decay and then you recast it to proc Desecrate, it's a massive burst damage button in AoE. It's basically almost the highest damage button you can click now as an unholy DK. As you start entering a new pool with a new Festering Scythe ready to apply 2 to 3 Festering Wounds on a bunch of targets, plus the double cast of Death and Decay to apply more Festering Wounds and do a ton of burst damage initially, is a very powerful combo. But yes, still, it won't make up for your mega large 15 plus target pulls you're currently doing in Mythic Plus. This is gonna be lost because of the target cap of Bursting Source. So yes, it's still an AoE nerf for Unholy DK. Now we have changes for Druid. The relevant changes are for Wildstalker, for Resto Druid. These are nerfs, likely more relevant in Mythic Plus because of how powerful they were compared to the raid. We have checked already the results of the healers in the raid, right? We went and looked at the better performer ones, and Resto Druid was not amongst them. It was not one of the major performers across the first 4 bosses. You have Symbiotic Blooms growing at a 30% rate instead of 40, so the chance to trigger your blooms is the same, 20%, it just triggers a slightly weaker bursting growth than before, as well as the weaker growth from the 2-piece. Now they were reasonably split in the testing in the raid. As I mentioned, the Resto Druid wasn't doing too well, but between the Keeper of the Grove builds and then the Wildstalker builds in the raid. Wildstalker, of course, was way less bursty and way more like consistent throughout the entire fight. Yes, it's not that the build changes too much if you move from Keeper of the Grove to Wildstalker. They pretty much still do the same things, basically. You still play around your spreading of rejuvenation, and then you do some Swiftmend into Wild Growth, and then you have your Convoke into your Flourish. It's about the same. The difference is that when you play Keeper, you also dump a bunch of Grove Guardians. You don't need to do this as Wildstalker, and instead you have a bunch of extra healing because of your Wild Growth, Regrowth, and F-Log can give you Symbiotic Blooms for extra healing, which you can then proc with Bursting Growth to heal even more. So it's way more consistent healing, less spiky and less bursty over the entire fight, and it was more relevant in terms of power in Mythic Plus than it was in the raid. And across these two, the more relevant nerf is the default nerf given to all of Wildstalker, only for Resto, not for Feral. Symbiotic Blooms and Bursting Growth, very simply having 30% increased healing instead of 50%. So the actual nerf here is quite relevant because this is like a 4+% healing nerf. And the more questionable point is whether or not perhaps Resto Druid could have deserved a compensation buff for the raid after these changes going for Wildstalker, which are basically all nerfs. We can stay on this theme because nerfs continue down Evoker and down Flameshaper, which also gets nerfed by quite a bit. Now, the 2-piece set bonus stacks at 25 and 50% instead of 40 and 80%. Now, Blizzard is being sneaky here. It mentioned Flameshaper Pres is actually Flameshaper Preservation and Devastation. The nerf is for both, not just for Preservation. Same goes for Chrono Warden. The tier set here is not being mentioned, but now Chrono Warden inside of your Temporal Burst will give you 3 Chrono Flames instead of 1, which was supposed to be 2 from the tier set. Now it's 3, and the damage was increased by like 25% as well, damage and healing of the Chrono Flames of Chrono Warden. There was a slight bug fix of Devastation with its Scaled Commander. The 4-piece can no longer be exploited. Your Mass Disintegrate, which could be used to hit 3 targets, and then your tier set would increase to 5 targets. There was the bug that when you summoned your Draktyrs as skill commander, before you had to cast an Empower spell during the Draktyrs being active, and it would stay up indefinitely as long as you consume the buff. The Draktyrs following you would just stay there forever and keep doing damage for you. This has now been bug fixed. Devastation has also been buffed by 3% as well. Now, Augmentation isn't even mentioned here, but they are receiving a significant buff. Augmentation wasn't really doing terribly in the PTR testing, right, of Heroic. They were actually reasonably in the top, like, I guess top half of the result. Not exactly like top 5 or anything, but not terrible either. And it's relevant because they are already playing this build, this hero talent, Skull Commander. It's a 43% damage buff. Why? Because this is getting buffed. These are pets. These are pets. These are coded as pets. But your aura, the base damage increase Blizzard gives to different specs to tune their damage, Augmentation was at plus 43% more damage. But it wasn't counting pets. With this change in the PTR, it will also now count pets, which means it will also now count the tier set, the Skull Commander tier set. So this can basically be buffed by 43% now for the results of Augmentation. Who is getting nerfed by quite a bit is Preservation. All healing reduced by 4% and Dream Breath gets nerfed by 20%. This is quite relevant for the current build of Flameshaper Evoker because, of course, first of all, 4% flat nerf and then 20% nerf of Dream Breath, which is also relevant because between, you know, different fights, different encounters, Dream Breath goes between 15 to 20% of your healing, so it's a 3 to 4% healing nerf on top of the flat 4% healing nerf you are receiving. And this gets, of course, an even bigger nerf because your tier set is also nerfed. Your Inner Flame, which was increasing your periodic healing, and of course, this is periodic healing, as well as things like, for example, Reversion also being periodic healing, and even Dreamflight being periodic healing. All of that gets nerfed as well. So we're talking about a over 10% healing nerf for Preservation. The only non-nerf change is completely worthless because it's the change that makes Temporal Artificer reducing the cooldown of Rewind by 2 minutes. A new non-Preservation player would be like, hold on a second, Rewind is OP. And, you know, it has a 4-minute cooldown. With this, it's going to have a 2-minute cooldown. Wow. A 2-minute cooldown Rewind. It's so powerful, it's so strong. No, it's not, because you have to choose between this or Stasis, and there is no universe in which you don't pick Stasis. This is completely irrelevant of a change. You will still continue to play around with Stasis as Evoker, no matter the build for Preservation. But sure, if we go by the results, Preservation was amongst the better performing ones, so a nerf was warranted. To be fair, also, spoiler, no nerfs went for Holy Priest or for Mistweaver, which were also the other two better performing ones. Now, Hunter, we have touched at length the two best performers of Hunter being Dark Ranger Marksmanship and Pack Leader BM, and they both get nerfed. Very simple TLDR, okay? So, for Dark Ranger, the biggest nerf is that Black Arrow is flat out nerfed by 8%, and then the hero talent, Soul Drinker, which is this one, or this one, gets also the nerf to the damage increase of both Black Arrow and Bleak Powder from 15 to 8%. So already, by default, Black Arrow gets a 15% nerf, which is quite relevant when you consider that in Mythic Plus, it was doing 40% of your damage, and in single target, a shockingly high 60% damage. Technically, the actual Black Arrow was about 50-ish, if you exclude the Razor Fragments talent. So this is already like a 7.5% nerf in single target, and as far as AoE went, it's also about like a 3.5% or so nerf. On top of that, for AoE, you have to add the nerf of Bleak Powder. 25% flat nerf and an extra 10% nerf. So it's like a 35% nerf for Bleak Powder in AoE. So this is another 4% nerf in AoE for Marksmanship. And then you have the last fallover damage nerf of Phantom Pain is in AoE. Splashing the damage of your aim shot is now 15% weaker. So aim shot, Phantom Pain, this is another 3% damage nerf in AoE. So it's like a 8 something percent nerf in single target and 10 plus percent nerf in AoE for marksmanship, for Dark Ranger marksmanship. BM gets a smaller nerf also because based on the results we checked, marksmanship was consistently ahead of BM. BM wasn't doing poorly, but marksmanship was the one that was at the very top. The main one is of course Stampede now doing 50% less damage and also minorly having an 8 target cap. That's about it. In terms of the major changes, these are the ones for BM. They are almost completely offset by the fact that now BM also gains 3% more damage. So actually they don't even lose nearly as much because of this. It's just a trade-off of Stampede being nerfed but your base damage being buffed. Mages, for once, don't get too many relevant things. Of course, though, the default state of Mage is still minor buffs. This is not even a nerf, because you were getting so many brain freeze procs, it was starting to become a bit unhealthy for Frost. Buffs to Spell Slinger to get more procs of Brain Freeze and Clear Casting, as well as Splinter's damage of Arcane. Admittedly, Arcane was doing very poorly, so it was a relevant buff. Sun Fury, we have talked about this at length, gets something we were asking for, reducing your burst window after your burst window. So reducing your burst buff after combustion ends by a bit, in exchange though for making it more powerful. So now you get half a second less of extension of Hyperthermia and Arcane Soul. Every time you consume a sphere, Sun Fury already gives you 1 second of this buff per sphere, and then the tier set was giving you 1 more second per sphere. Now though, it's only half a second. So you are losing basically 3 seconds of Hyperthermia, but you are gaining now 10% more haste during Hyperthermia and 10% more damage during Hyperthermia. So it's a good trade-off for both Mage, Fire, and Arcane. Also, on top of this, just to confirm the favorite class of Blizzard, Fire also gets a freebie 3% damage increase. Why not? Why shouldn't they get it? Further buffs to Brewmaster. This hasn't been mentioned in this set of changes, but actually Celestial Infusion now gives you upwards of 30% incoming damage DR, which now solidifies this as your best option as a Brewmaster. Now, some players might be confused by reading these two tooltips. It looks like, it feels like they seem to be doing about the same thing. But what they actually do, using the help of our paint friend, is that in one case, in the current already existing Celestial Brew, compared to the new Celestial Infusion, the difference very simply is that for Celestial Brew, you're gonna create a mega barrier, a mega absorb shield. Whereas for Celestial Infusion, you're gonna create the exactly equal in number, equal in size shield, except it will take only 30% of the damage, 30% damage reduction, basically. So in this case, if you take half of it, you simply take all of it absorbed. In this case, if you were to take this amount of damage, this would go to your health, and this would go to your shield. This is obviously very, very good because this keeps giving value to your healing, right? If you're in Mythic Plus and you have a Resto Druid with 25, just about, hots on you, in this case, these hots are useless because all you're doing is absorbing all of the damage. Instead, with this new version of the Celestial Brew, Celestial Infusion, you can absorb some damage, take some damage yourself, and keep gaining value from your own self-healing, which is quite good as Brewmaster, as well as your own healer's healing, which is very, very good, which will be your new default way of mitigation as Brewmaster over Celestial Brew, which will now only be used against certain types of one-shots, right? Because in the case of one-shots, if there is a hit about to hit you for 20 million HP, in this case, you will be able to fully absorb it. But if 20 million are about to hit you, in this case, you're only going to be soaking up 6 million from this 30%, because 30% of 20 million is 6, and you're going to be taking 14 million, which is not very good in this example. So Celestial Brew now will basically just be the default for your mega hits, and not for the consistent damage in, Mythic Plus pools of trash most of the time. Then we have the continued Blizzard fixation of continuing to buff the caster version of Holy Paladin. Holy Light buffed, Infusion of Light buffing Flash of Light by a gigantic amount, and now Inflorescence of the Sunwell buffs the effect for Flash of Light by 50% instead of 15. Very bad news for Holy Paladins. This is not really what you wanted to see, also considering how poorly on average Holy Paladin was already doing in testing. Nerfs to Shadow, Void Volley damage reduced by 15%, and the Idol of N'Zoth, the new Idol of N'Zoth damage, nerfed by 30%. This is, varying in terms of numbers, but it's not that big. It's larger in AoE, of course. In pure single target, it's only like a 2% nerf. In AoE, it can go up to like 5% nerf for Shadow Priest. Surprise or not, 0 changes for Rogue and for Shaman. Tiny changes for Warlock. Soul Harvester gets the dot, your demonic soul now assaults enemies for 9 seconds instead of 12. And another nerf, your damage dealt by your demonic soul is increased by 20% instead of 45%. This was a very powerful tier set for Warlock, especially for both Affliction and Demo as well. Demo gets the larger amount of changes. Flat out 6% damage increase is the more important one, together with your Tyrant going back to being able to empower up to 10 imps. Now, the original set of changes reduced this to 5, but increased the damage of the empowered imps by 25% more damage instead of 15. Now, this has been reverted, so you're back to empowering 10 of them, but the other buff, the 25% damage buff of your imps instead of 15%, hasn't been reverted. So actually, now this is just a buff, basically, to your Tyrant usage as a demo lock. And then many, we have gotten this all throughout the changes, continued nerfs to the Liberation of Undermine tier sets all across the specs, to try to make sure that these tier sets are, removed as soon as a new patch comes out, just in case they continue to be very strong at the beginning of the new season. Unfortunately, no real major changes for Warrior. This is just a wording change for Spellbreaker. Instead of negating 100% of the damage, now it reduced the damage by 100%, but the result is basically the same for Prot Warrior. So these are all of the changes in this set of balance tuning. We had a reasonable split of buffs and nerfs, very likely possibly also based on what Blizzard was able to observe in these changes, because for example, this was nerfed, this was nerfed, and this was nerfed, for example, when it comes to damage, and for example, this one was nerfed as well. Sure, this one was buffed, and more confusingly, this one was nerfed as well for healing. And a few other important changes, like the target cap added to Unholy, positive changes to Mage, the big nerfs to both of the very well performing counter specs right now on the PTR, and more positive vibes around Brewmaster, who is quietly sneaking in to be the currently tankiest tank in the PTR based on all of these positive changes they keep receiving so far. So this is what we have for this set of tuning on this Friday for the PTR of Season 3. With this out of the way though, we can now leave each other. We're starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, fuck, the nose itching assault has come back. That's because the unedited timer on this video is 31 minutes, which is too much.